Okay, so here's the full plan. We're going to discuss it. The full plan is point one: Ukraine's sovereignty will be confirmed, which is something that Russia has already agreed to. They don't want to control Ukraine. By their own admission, they don't want to control the entirety of Ukraine. They want a sovereign Ukraine, but they want a sovereign Ukraine that is neutral. And of course, they want a sovereign Ukraine that is essentially controlled by Russia,
Yeah.
as all great powers do with their neighbors, right?
Yeah, I mean, because that's the real contest here is which side is going to control Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
But Ukraine is not one of the sides.
No, Ukraine is Ukraine's sovereignty is it actual sovereignty is not up for discussion here. It's either going to be controlled by NATO / the EU / the United States, which is ultimately just the United States, or it's going to be controlled by Russia. And I say controlled, I mean heavily influenced by, because like as controlled as Mexico is by the United States, it is mostly just heavily influenced by the United States. Same with Canada, right?
Yeah.
A comprehensive non-aggression agreement will be concluded between Russia, Ukraine, and Europe. All ambiguities in the last 30 years will be considered settled, which I think is an unequivocally good thing if that was to happen. A new security architecture, which includes the needs of Russia, Ukraine, and the European Union, all settled in a peace conference.
Yeah. I mean, that's ostensibly that's what we all want. That's what we have all wanted since before there was a war.
It is expected that Russia will not invade neighboring countries and NATO will not expand further, which, if you look at the countries that Russia has invaded since the collapse of the Soviet Union, there's what? Georgia. And when was that?
In like
2008.
8, right.
Yeah, but what prompted it, though? Do you remember?
NATO expansion.
Well, I mean, that would be the mechanism behind what happened. But what happened was the Georgian military attacking Russian troops in South Ossetia to try to drive them out. And there's a Russian minority in South Ossetia, and there were Russian troops there as peacekeepers. And the Georgian military, which had been recently refitted by the United States and NATO, attacked Russian troops in South Ossetia. And Russia steamrolled Georgia in like 8 days and completely annihilated their all of the infrastructure that NATO had built up, and, just hamstrung them. Yeah, it was South Ossetia and Abkhazia. And, yeah, anyway, so it was, and that's always been promoted as, Russia's unbridled and unprovoked aggression against Georgia, when it was the invasion of South Ossetia by Georgia that sparked Russia's response to the invasion. But I don't know much about that, and that's not what we're talking about. So let's move on. A dialogue will be held, number 4, a dialogue will be held between Russia and NATO, mediated by the United States, to resolve all security issues and create conditions for de-escalation in order to ensure global security and increase opportunities for cooperation and future economic development. And that's what Trump wants right there. They want Russia as an economic partner. They want to use economics to pull Russia away from China, which I think at this point, it's far too little too late. Trump's diplomacy has been so stupid and ham-fisted. It'll never happen.
No.
Ukraine will receive reliable security guarantees. A U.S. official said that this would be an explicit security guarantee for Ukraine from the U.S., the first time this has been officially on the table. So that's something right there that Russia will never accept. Russia will never accept a security guarantee from the United States for Ukraine. That is the same thing as Ukraine being in NATO, right? Because if there is if Ukraine is essentially an ally of the United States still, then it is no longer neutral, and the United States still retains its power in the area.
There's one difference, which is just, it's essentially the same as being in NATO officially. what makes it different is that there won't be NATO forces stationed in the country, and it won't be used as an offensive platform for U.S. military adventures. That's what NATO is actually used for. Like NATO
Right.
is a defensive alliance, which just happened to do things like institute a no-fly zone over Libya. It's like, well, stuff like that. That's the difference, and I feel like that difference is important.
Sure. Let's see. The size of the Ukrainian armed forces will be limited to 600,000 personnel. And it says, note, Ukraine's army currently includes 800 to 850,000 personnel and includes around 250 prior to the war, according to Ukrainian officials. So, on paper, Ukraine has around 800 to 850,000 people in its military.
Right.
But we know, and several sources report this, including the Ukrainians themselves that are on the front lines, that they've got battalions on the hottest part of the front operating at about 30%. And they've got a massive desertion crisis. And they are unable to replenish casualties. Self-admittedly unable to replenish casualties. So what I've seen estimated is that at very, very best, Ukraine has around 300 to 500,000 people in uniform. And probably only about 250,000 of those are on the front lines. And most of them are not combat ready.
Right.
So it's like
that 600,000 is that seems very, very generous, but also like they're never going to have 600,000 troops.
Also, it's a complete non-starter. Russia will not accept that.
Yeah,
Russia will not accept that. They want like 100,000 strong peacekeeping force essentially, and that's it. Ukraine will agree to enshrine its constitution so that it will not join NATO, and NATO agrees to include in its statutes a provision that Ukraine will not be admitted in the future. So essentially what they're forcing Ukraine to do is what they would force Ukraine to do is go back to its constitution that was signed whenever they became a country, the pre-Maidan constitution. It's the post-Maidan constitution that includes like, we will join the EU and we will join NATO. And this would basically be, and that constitution was extra constitutionally created.
Right.
They overthrew a democratically elected constitutional government and installed an ethno-nationalist government undemocratically. And that's what the West champions. NATO agrees not to station troops in Ukraine. However, NATO countries like France and the UK have been working on separate proposals that would include troops stationed in Ukraine. So that right there is going to be a complete non-starter, no matter what. European fighter jets will be stationed in Poland. European fighter jets are stationed in Poland. First of all, because Poland is European. And second of all, because the Dutch... Anyway, NATO has fighters planes stationed in Poland. So I don't know what the fucking point of this piece is. This is like someone didn't do their homework. Number 10.
I mean, that's very likely that's what happened.
Number 10, the U.S. guarantee. The U.S. will receive compensation for its guarantees, meaning that Ukraine will pay for protection. If Ukraine invades Russia, it will lose the guarantee. That means Russian territory that the United States will acknowledge as Russian territory, even if Ukraine doesn't. If Russia invades Ukraine, in addition to a decisive coordinated military response, all global sanctions will be reinstated. Recognition of the new territory and all other benefits of this deal will be revoked. And if Ukraine launches a missile at Moscow or St. Petersburg without cause, the security guarantee will be deemed invalid.
I mean, that's reasonable.
Right. Number 11, Ukraine is eligible for EU membership and will receive short-term preferential access to the European market while this issue is being considered. I think that's probably something that Russia would not object to if the EU hadn't just recently decided that it's no longer just a trade union, but is also a military alliance. So that right there would be up to, I don't know. I think that's probably a non-starter for Russia at this point because it sort of removes Ukraine from neutrality. Number 12, a powerful global package of measures to rebuild Ukraine, including but not limited to the creation of a Ukraine Development Fund, um, to invest in fast-growing industries like technology, data centers, and artificial intelligence. Basically, the United States would just loot Ukraine even further and use Ukraine to host its incredibly destructive new technologies. The United States will cooperate with Ukraine to jointly rebuild, develop, modernize, and operate Ukraine's gas infrastructure, including pipelines and storage facilities, meaning that the U.S. companies would come in and loot Ukraine's gas infrastructure and pipelines,
Right.
and joint efforts to rehabilitate war-affected areas for the restoration, reconstruction, and modernization of cities and residential areas, infrastructural development, extraction of minerals and natural resources, and the World Bank will develop a special financing package to accelerate these efforts, meaning that the World Bank would fund Ukraine to give money to the United States to redevelop Ukraine in an completely extractive capacity.
I wonder if that special financing package is intended to include the frozen Russian assets that they've been talking about using to rebuild Ukraine with, because that's definitely going to be another non-starter for Russia.
Yep. Russia will, number 13, Russia will be reintegrated into the global economy. The lifting of sanctions will be discussed and agreed upon. The United States will enter into long-term economic cooperation agreements. Sorry, I need to drink some water or something. Give me a second. The United States will enter into a long-term economic cooperation agreement for mutual development in areas of energy, natural resources, infrastructure, artificial intelligence, data centers, rare earth metal extraction projects in the Arctic, and other mutually beneficial cooperation agreements. This would, of course, end run the Chinese monopoly on rare earths. And Russia will be invited to the G8, something that they have already said that they do not want, because BRICS is better for Russia than the G8 anyway. And number 14, Russia's frozen funds will be used in the following ways. $100 billion in frozen Russian assets will be invested into U.S.-led efforts to build and invest in Ukraine. the U.S. will receive 50% of the profits from this venture. Europe will add
Seriously,
$100 billion.
how is that? How do they even think that's possibly going to be talked about?
Right. Europe will add $100 billion to increase the amount of investment available for Ukraine's reconstruction. Frozen European funds will be unfrozen. The remainder of the frozen Russian funds will be invested in a separate U.S.-Russian investment vehicle that will implement joint projects in specific areas. This fund will be aimed at strengthening the relations and increasing common interest to create a strong incentive not to return to conflict. Basically, this is like taking all the frozen Russian assets that the Europeans want to take, to actually legally steal, to take illegally, to steal them and give them to Ukraine to fight the war. The United States wants to take all of those assets and use them to rebuild Ukraine using American companies, to which 50% of the profits will go to the United States.
So basically, the Europeans want to seize the Russian assets and then give them to Ukraine. The United States wants to seize the Russian assets and then keep them.
Mm-hmm. A joint American-Russian working group on security issues will be established to promote and ensure compliance with all provisions of this agreement. Russia will enshrine in its law its policy of non-aggression towards Europe and Ukraine. The United States and Russia will start to extend the validity of treaties on the non-proliferation and control of nuclear weapons, including the START Treaty, which is the nuclear arms reduction treaty, which is set to expire in February. Which I don't think that this right here should just be something that the United States and Russia do anyway. It should not be tied to a peace in Ukraine. And I think tying it to peace in Ukraine is incredibly irresponsible on the United States' part. There should just be a nuclear arms reduction treaty no matter what. Ukraine, number 18. Number 18, Ukraine agrees to be a non-nuclear state in accordance with a treaty on nuclear non-proliferation, which, I think that's one of Russia's demands. That's a non-negotiable in Russia's demands. The Zaporozhye nuclear power plant will be relaunched under the supervision of the IAEA, and the electricity provided will be distributed equally between Russia and Ukraine, which right now it's 100% under the control of Russia. Ukraine will so both countries will undertake to implement educational programs in schools and society aimed at promoting understanding and tolerance of different cultures and eliminating racism and prejudice, which, by the way, has come out already, that this right here is a 100% non-starter for the Ukrainians.
Yeah, It seems as though it would be. I think that there will be a shock for some people, but it's on the same it's the same order of magnitude of it's the same kind of issue as the recent UN votes to ban the use of torture that the United States and Israel both voted against, and then everybody else voted for, except for Argentina, because $40 billion, you gotta give us something, like vote against banning torture.
Right.
Yeah.
Ukraine will adopt, this is all part of number 20 still. Ukraine will adopt EU rules on religious tolerance and the protection of linguistic minorities, which are already just really shoddy anyway. Like, look at the Roma population in Europe.
Yeah.
And the Russian population in the Baltics.
Yeah.
Russian-speaking population in the Baltics. Both countries will agree to abolish all discriminatory measures and guarantee the rights of Ukrainian and Russian media and education, which, like, that right there is a huge non-starter for the Ukrainians. The main goal of Maidan, the main goal of Maidan is Ukrainianization of Ukraine. It is to force the Russians to speak Ukrainian, force the Russians to, the Russian-speaking Ukrainians, force the Russian-speaking Ukrainians to become Ukrainians in language, in custom, in media, in everything. All Nazi ideology and activities must be rejected and prohibited. Which, like, I like the gist of this, but what do Banderites say already? It's like, oh yeah, that's fine because we're not Nazis, and I think that, like, the clumsy usage of the term Nazi has been a sort of gotcha for Western liberals and Ukrainian Nazis themselves. But
I mean, I guess yes, sort of. But, like, if the provision is that, we know that the Azovites and the Banderites are going to be ethno-nationalists, quasi-fascists, but you can't wear SS bolts on your helmet, and you can't fly a swastika flag as the Azov battalion. That's a non-starter. That's something. Yeah.
No, but I mean, like, so most of the fascists in Ukraine are explicitly Banderite. The Azovites are the only ones who are explicitly Hitlerite, but they pretend like they're not. They say, no, we're not National Socialists. We're social nationalists.
Well, they're not National Socialists in at least the sense that their vision of the economic development is even more negotiable than Hitler.
Right. Okay,
but otherwise, they're very, very Hitlerite.
Number 21. Crimea, Luhansk, and Donetsk will be recognized as de facto Russian territory by the United States. They're saying that it's just de facto, not de jure. But this treaty will be legally binding, meaning it would be de jure.
Right. But only by the United States?
Huh?
It's only by the United States, not by...
Well, if the United States does it, then so will the rest of the world except Ukraine.
Okay.
But they can't do anything about it because if they invade Russian territory, then they lose their security guarantees and their cooperation agreements. Right? So not only is this... It says de facto right here, but this is really de jure. Russia will relinquish other agreed territories it controls outside of the 5 regions. Crimea, Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporozhye. Those are the 5 territories. They also control areas in Kharkiv, Mykolaiv, and Sumy. Right. Okay, so Kharkiv, Mykolaiv, and Sumy would go back to the Ukrainians, and the Russians would withdraw their forces from there. Ukrainian forces would withdraw from parts of Donetsk Oblast that they currently control, which is barely any, and the withdrawal zone will be considered a neutral demilitarized buffer zone, internationally recognized as territory that belongs to the Russian Federation. Russian forces will not enter this demilitarized zone, which is silly. If it's Russian territory, then they should be allowed to enter it. After agreeing on, this is number 22, after agreeing on future territorial arrangements, both Russian Federation and Ukraine will undertake not to change these arrangements by force. Any security guarantees will not apply in the event of the breach of this commitment. Number 23, Russia will not prevent Ukraine from using the Dnieper River for commercial activities, and agreements will be reached on the free transport of grain across the Black Sea. Number 24, a humanitarian committee will be established to resolve outstanding issues, including prisoners and bodies exchanged, civilian detainees and hostages, including children. Family reunification programs will be implemented. There already is one, but it will be run by, I guess, the United States. And measures will be taken to alleviate the suffering of victims from the conflict. Number 25, Ukraine will hold elections in 100 days. 26, all parties in this conflict will receive full amnesty for their actions during the war and agree not to make any claims or consider any complaints in the future. So this one's interesting because everyone assumes that this benefits Russia. So everyone assumes that it's because the Russians are, because of the war crimes that the Russians know that they're guilty of. But what this really is about, I think, and this is my speculation and several other people who follow this, is this is about corruption in Ukraine during the war.
Yeah.
Not war crimes.
I was going to say, I wonder how that particular element will be, I wonder how Russia will respond to it.
I'm sure Russia would be okay with that. This is something that I don't think that they would have a problem with. They wouldn't insist on it because they don't acknowledge the legitimacy of the claims against them, but I think it's something that they would accept. Number 27, this agreement will be legally binding. Its implementation will be monitored and guaranteed by the Peace Council headed by President Donald J. Trump, and sanctions will be imposed for violations. So that's funny because remember how the de facto not de jure implementation of this will be legally binding. Once all parties agree to this memorandum, the ceasefire will take effect immediately after both sides retreat to agreed points to begin implementation of the agreement.